Alrighty. Alrighty. Hello, everybody. All right, can everybody hear me? Everybody. Okay, I see about 16 people in here right now. Dr. Z, can you hear me all right?
I hear you fine.
Okay, good. It's just lagging a little bit, so I just want to make sure. All right. But for those of you who are in, if you could just type in the comments for us, just to let us know if you can hear us okay. If you can see Dr. Z all right. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. Great, there we go. All right, starting to see everybody comment now. All right, if you guys could just tell us where you're from. We're gonna wait just a couple minutes before we get started, just to make sure that everyone has time to kind of sneak in here. But tell us where you're from. We usually have people from all over the world. We're based in Chicago, Northbrook specifically, a suburb just north of Chicago. But we see, yeah, people. Dr. Z, what kind of people or where people come from around the world this week, I guess?
This week we had Canadians. We had a couple Canadians and then a lot of people from California, Michigan, Iowa, Florida, Seattle, several places. And then we had a couple of people from Amsterdam.
Oh, nice. Amsterdam too.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Okay, we see Seattle, northern Minnesota, Washington, Maine, San Diego, Vermont, Canada. All right. Chicago, Virginia. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. Dr. Z is with me today, of course, lovingly known as Dr. Z, Deborah Zielinski, OD, FCOVD, FNORA. And today we are going to be talking about misjudging space. Oh, one second. I lost the title. Oh, I lost the title completely. How misjudging space creates problems in patients with TBI, ADHD, and ASD. And Dr. Z, I just want to start off by asking you about, I thought these were really intriguing bullets you came up with that we sent out to our email list that I'd like to speak on. So the first bullet you sent out was, we're going to talk about how linking visual sensors with those from the neck and feet can improve balance. So can you just speak on that a little bit? It's just very interesting.
Well, when you move your eyes, your neck moves also. It's very, very rare that you sit and your head is still and you don't move your neck and only your eyes. In fact, the only time that I see that happen is during an eye exam when the eye doctor says, follow my target, but don't move your head. So your neck and your eyes have a huge connection. When you tilt your head, you can tilt it to the side, you can rotate it, you can tip it up and down. Then there's a signal in your inner ear that triggers your head position, that sends a signal to your brain for head position. So there's your neck, the muscles themselves, that as they turn, the neck muscles can tighten or loosen. Then there's the inner ear, which gives your brain signals of where your head is positioned. And then you have sensors from your feet. Like if you were on a ramp going up or downhill or tilted sideways, your feet would feel it because your weight bearing would shift. So those are all connected to your peripheral eyesight, and they all contribute to balance. Now, auditory sounds also contribute to balance, but it's not typically used as much. So the biggies are your feet, your head position, your neck muscles, and your peripheral eyesight.
So it's almost a little bit that the eyes, would you say the eyes govern what the body does?
No, the body does what the floor does, and then the eyes have to make an interpretation of it, because the eyes will be slower than the body. If I took your floor and it tilted it suddenly, your body would respond way before your eyes responded. So
Got
your
it.
body would respond, because if the floor suddenly tilted and then your body shifted its center of gravity, then immediately you have a reflex movement of where your eyes are pointing. But the actual peripheral eyesight is slower than the reflex movements are.
Okay.
And then the
Mm.
central eyesight is even slower.
Oh yeah, definitely. So bullet number 2 is how alleviating misjudgment of space can aid in concentration during reading.
So when we talked about misjudgment of space, I actually ran that by a few people, and all of them said, oh, I misjudge space all the time. I bump into things. I misjudge. I can't play sports. And I said, but space isn't just far space and walking, which is navigating through space. You're also navigating when you read. So if you misjudge space, if you look at something and you misjudge the size of it or the location of it, then you're not going to be able to point your eyes quickly from one spot to another when reading. And if you get to the end of a line and you have to find where the next line starts, but you've not turned your peripheral eyesight on, or the peripheral eyesight is on, but it's misjudging where the line is, you're going to misread. You're going to skip over words, or you're going to not be able to find your place. Or if you're reading out loud, then you're going to, and you look up for a split second and come back, it will be hard to find your place. So spatial misjudgment creates a lot of extra energy to be used, which later in one of the slides, one of my patients called brain drain. And most of our patients, if they have TBIs, they complain of this brain drain. I'm so fatigued because my brain is just on overload. I can't deal with it. The attention deficit people, they don't tend to complain of a drain on their brain because their brain's flitting from place to place to place, and they tend to have enough energy. And the people on the autistic spectrum typically have found a solution where they just turn off the peripheral eyesight and zoom in as a tunnel and look at whatever they want to, or go inside their head where there's a lot of imagination going on. But so misjudging space on a flat surface occurs when you don't have a good judgment of size or location of targets. And the first bullet point of misjudging space when you're trying to walk and you have bad balance, that's often because of a mismatch between the peripheral eyesight and the foot sensors, as well as the neck position and head position sensors.
And then the last couple of bullet points, I know you said these are a little similar, but how linking multiple senses can make people feel more like themselves again, and how linking auditory with visual perception can make listening easier.
Yeah, if you're linking different senses together, then that's what people live with. When people grow up from babyhood onwards, seeing something, hearing something, smelling something, all at one time in unison, and then they learn. After a brain injury, or in people with ADD or autistic spectrum, there's some glitch. The TBI patients have lost that ability. When they had their injury, something got unplugged and disrupted. But the ADD people or the autistic spectrum people, it never developed in the first place. So they're not themselves, because when you have something that gets disrupted and it's not put back together correctly the way it was, you just don't feel right. So what I'm trying to say here is that you have a lot of inputs going in through your ears and your eyes, and if those inputs are mismatched, if the right input and the left inputs don't go in equally, or if the peripheral and the central of the two systems together, the right and left, aren't balanced, then people are going to be confused. The confusion creates stress chemicals. The stress chemicals create problems, and they don't feel like themselves. or in auditory visual especially, which is what we emphasize, it's very hard to gain all the nuances of what you're watching. I mean, I remember I had that in school. If I wanted to listen to a teacher really well, but not really pay attention to what they were writing on the board, I would sit on one side of the room. But if I wanted to take notes from what they were writing, I would sit on the other side of the room. And it made a big difference. You can see it in movie theaters. When movie theaters before COVID were a place to go every weekend, then people would wander in. And if you put them in the middle, they tend to wander either to the right side or the left side or the center. And if you took all the people who wander way over to the left or the right, they usually pick the section of the theater where the inputs come in comfortably. So you'll see children on the autistic spectrum who gravitate toward one side or the other because they often want to block off peripheral eyesight from one side. It makes them behave better.
So they're just doing that on a subconscious level?
They're doing it subconsciously. I mean, I've had so many patients say they don't take their children to restaurants because it's a toss-up. Sometimes their children are angels and sometimes they're monsters. And I've always asked, well, are the times that they're monsters when they're always sitting on one side of the booth? Because if all the movement in the restaurant is on one side of them and the wall is on the other side, then you have to switch it. Often you'll just put the child on the other side of the booth and they change behaviors instantly. So people don't think that, because the average person, you walk in a restaurant, you're sitting in the restaurant, you tune out all the movement. And some people on the spectrum can't.
It's really interesting. Now I'm thinking of my own experiences and how often I'd sit in a classroom or interesting. Huh. Okay. So I know you did prepare some slides. I don't know if you want to jump into those about how this all applies to people with TBI, ADHD, ASD. I did see a lot of comments in here about or that the comment about brain drain really hit home for people.
Mm-hmm. That's I didn't make that up. One of my patients did. They classified everything in terms of brain drain, which was on their mind mentally, and brain pain, which was more in their body. Mm-hmm. So this is a slide I want to start with because we at Mind Eye Institute, we work with 4 A's. We have attention to awareness. That's the 2. And we have a continuum of a pen light to a floodlight. And I've mentioned this before on other speeches, but the pen light end is if you're just turning one small, like a laser beam, if you could take a laser beam and stick it on your forehead and that's what you're paying attention to, that's one end of the spectrum. And the opposite end is more of a floodlight where you just flood the environment floods into your eye and the whole retina is activated rather than part of it. So on the pen light end, where you're paying attention, if you live on this end, they tend to label you with an autistic spectrum disorder. If you live on the other end, they tend to label you with an attention deficit problem. The average person, the neurotypical person, lives in the middle. And from the middle, they sometimes turn the floodlight on so they can scan and do things they need to do. And sometimes they turn the pen light on and then come back to the middle. So the perfect scenario is where the floodlight is muted, but it's on all the time. So you're definitely aware. When you're reading, you're aware of the page and the paragraphs and where the next line is. When you're scanning, you're aware of any movement on the sides of you so you don't get startled. But the floodlight would typically be on but muted. And then the pen light for attention would be on also, but not so much attention that it drains your brain, and it allows you to still link what you're seeing with what's going on in your mind, with your mental desktop. So when you have a brain injury or some sort of autonomic dysfunction or different medications, it's going to push you in different places on the continuum, and the ability to flip from one to the other back and forth changes. So you can get people with attention disorders that have both. They can be either in floodlight mode where everything is in front of them and they can't pay attention to anything, or they're so much paying attention that they're completely unaware of what else is going on around them. You can get one or the other. There's also attitude, of whether you feel like the world has made you into a victim, or for instance, Clark Elliott, who wrote The Ghost in My Brain, his attitude was that of a fighter. And he came in and said, someone rear-ended me, they screwed up my life. You tell me what I have to do, whether it's walking on hot coals or wearing 5 pairs of glasses or switching glasses every 10 minutes, and I'll do it, and I want to be better. And he got better, and then he wrote the book, The Ghost in My Brain. But his attitude was very different than a different patient who also was rear-ended in the same way, who said, the woman who hit me from behind screwed up my life. I'm now miserable. I can't do my original life. I'm going to be this way for the whole rest of my life. Isn't it awful? This person screwed up my life. So their attitude is a big piece of whether or not you can handle this, because people with poor attitudes try something and it takes too long or it takes too much energy, and then they give up. The people who plug away and plow through it with the right attitude, we've been getting tremendous success with. And the last A is adaptation. You have to be able to adapt to change and shift from one thing to another. Now, my mentor, Albert Sutton, he used to quote Henry David Thoreau all the time. And he used to say, Thoreau wrote, the flexibility of your adaptability is the measure of true intelligence. And nobody knew what he was talking about. And now here it is, 30 years later, and now I'm realizing that he was talking about the adaptability measurement, and how that adaptability measurement has to be flexible. And the more flexible it is, the more you can slide up and back on this continuum, the easier life is. And that's the really neat thing about the peripheral retina, that it turns on and off depending on your attitude, depending on your comfort level. And that's what we're measuring. We're actually measuring neurological signals, and then we can change them by activating peripheral retinal signaling. So the retina, as I said many times, if you took your brain and you take a chunk of brain tissue and pull it forward, that becomes your retina. But on the other end, if you take your brain and pull it downwards, that becomes your spinal cord. So your spinal cord and the rest of your brain and your retina are all connected, and they're all called the central nervous system. And they make decisions, and signals go up and down all the time. So since the retina is made out of the brain tissue, you're not always using all of it at one time, but some of it's on mute, some of it's on loud. And we, with a retinoscope, can look at the activity that's happening and pay attention to when you're daydreaming, when you're concentrating, whether you're engaged in the outside environment, what's happening. And it's pretty neat. People do not realize that the retinas turn on and off. When they turn off, they don't get completely off, but they lessen activity, just like in your brain. I mean, your brain's working 100% of the time, even when you're sleeping. But when you're sleeping or just waking up, the brain activity is not the same as when you're in full-blown mode during the day. So that's kind of what we do at Mind Eye, is we're measuring all these things. The more you activate your eyes and use them, the more neurological activity that happens. The more neurological activity, the more blood flow comes to the area. So we're altering blood flow and electrical activity. Now, when you look at the different space, it's dependent on your eye position as well as attention. So if somebody's looking down at a paper, the amount of space that they perceive is very small. And if they're looking up or far away, up and out is where your eyes move, or down and in, then they are aware of a much bigger chunk of space. So you could have the person standing by this window, but not paying attention to anything outside the window. So the amount of perceived space there and the amount of the peripheral retina that's turned on would be smaller than this person who's looking at everything. So their actual gaze is on a building across the street. But if all of a sudden the car were to move or the airplane were to land, they would be aware of it. Now, what happens is you have two main decisions that go through. One decision is, should I deal with what's inside my head, or should I deal with what's coming in at me? But what comes in can be in space and time. It can be too much, it can be too fast, or it could be too difficult. Most of the ADD patients I see, or the autistic people, things are not too difficult. They're either too fast or too much. And what happens when you make a decision of, boy, the world is sending me so much information, I can't deal with it. You do one of two things. You either say, I'm out of here, and you go inside your mind and go through whatever you're imagining or whatever's happening. And that's why this person on the left is saying, oops, the person on the left is saying, when is class over? My knee hurts, I'm hungry. And we will have patients, little kids that, during their eye exam, which is to them is boring, they'll be, my stomach hurts. When are we going to be finished? I'm going on vacation next week. Mom, can we go to Walgreens after we finish here? That's things on their mind, as opposed to somebody commenting on what's going on around them. So one way is to just check out and say, I'm going in my head. It's way more interesting. Or the other way is to say, so much is coming in at me. I can't handle it all. I'll just deal with one thing. And those are children when they're reading that just pick up one word or one letter, or they harp on one thing. So we have a passage that talks about a body, and a lot of children read it as the word baby, because baby and body look very similar. And so if they're glancing and they're not really paying attention, they'll read it wrong because they see a word with a general shape. And in their mind says, oh, that shaped word, that says baby. And then, so it's interesting. That's the first decision. Do I deal with outside or inside? Because I have limited attention. Do I care about what's inside or what's outside? Now, if everything pours in, the second decision is what I had the continuum on, attention versus awareness. So the awareness is where you have this giant mental desktop with everything on it. And then that's the big picture, the strategy. But then you have to say, okay, what do I need? How do I start? What's the next thing? What's my sequence? When am I going to do it? And then there's a decision of, what should I put the pen light on when I have the floodlight with so much stuff? And then you decide, I'm only going to focus on one thing. So if you go into a party, you turn the floodlight on and see the whole room and all the people in the room and maybe the decorations and the food, refreshments. But then you say, out of all these things, I see my best friend, or I see something I want to eat. And then you zoom your pen light on and go toward that. But while you're navigating the space in a party, you can't turn the floodlight off completely because you'd be bumping into people. Thus, things that go bump in the daytime with our patients. But you have to have the peripheral awareness on enough so that you can move around and not bump into anything. So you have to maintain awareness, but also place attention, but not so much attention that it drains your brain. If you have too much attention, you shut off the big awareness. And if you have too little attention, you miss details. So those were the main slides that I had. This slide was more to answer some of the questions that might be talked about. How there's retinal processing in your eye before you get sensory integration. And I talked to people constantly about, they use the word sensory integration. My sibling or my child has sensory integration problems. What is that? Well, it comes after retinal processing. And after the sensory integration at an unconscious level of the body, then you go into subconscious visual processing of what you mentally filter depending on who you are and what interests you have. And then after the subconscious goes through and whatever you're aware of, then you go into conscious visual processing and decide, I want to look at this. There's a piece of art on the wall. I want to see it more. I'm going to point my eyes and zoom my attention and turn that pen light on and focus on the details. And that's what we measure for classic eye examinations, that aiming and focusing ability. So it's the last thing. And if it's the last one in a long chain of events and it has a problem, you get labeled with convergence insufficiency, accommodative problems, eye movement dysfunction. There's so many labels on that last step. And what we're looking at Mind Eye Institute is which level of the earlier parts is the problem on. And if we find it, we change the retinal processing, and it's going to have its trickle-down effect on the rest. So
yeah, that seems to be the number one question that's coming in is, this is a perfect place for it, is, so far you've really described a lot of people to a T. So then what do we do? What's our role in helping people who do have these balance and coordination issues, and have suffered effects of TBI or been labeled with ADHD, ASD? So,
our role is to step back and say, we're doing retinal filtering. That's us. And it's at the top of the chain. But there's many, many other specialists that work with chemical systems. There's muscular systems, thinking systems, emotional systems. So there's so many other systems that are all coordinated, all part of a team. So our job would be to measure how the neurological signals are being handled, whether the retinal filtering is doing its job, whether there's an imbalance between the right and the left or the central and peripheral. I mean, that's mostly what we emphasize and what we measure, and what we find. So many people come in with glasses meant to sharpen their eyesight on the outside, but it's their inside that's not feeling right. So if we change the way the outside environment comes in, then the person is going to feel more comfortable internally.
mhm.
But we
And
change the outside and we measure the movements. We measure eye movements and body movements. So if we know what we put in the retina and we know what movements came out, we can figure out what's going on in this black box there.
yeah, and so for people who have like an amalgamation of all these symptoms, I'm just going to speak in general terms. Say they have symptoms just across the board. What's a good way to know where to start? Would they start with us, or how should they go about finding treatment?
Well, if their attitude is such that they're ready for help, then they should start with us. If their attitude is still, well, somebody ruined my life, I can't do it, it's too hard, I already tried 10 eye doctors, I tried glasses, it doesn't work. If they're in that attitude, then they should start with some emotional bolstering of some support group. There's a lot of great support groups for brain injuries online, or for ADD, parents of ADD children, those types of things. A lot of the children with ADD are gifted. So Linda Silverman's work is great when she has a book called Upside Down Brilliance, and it's how you think a completely different way than how they teach. And Temple Grandin for the autistic population has beautiful work, is I think in pictures, but you teach in words. That's a great book. So that's where they should start. People don't always realize though, like we have countless people who don't need any glasses to see. They walk in and they're like, I see 20/20. I went to the eye doctors. There isn't anything wrong with my eyes. But that's the straight ahead. Can you see and identify a target that's way over here? What is it? What we do is we'll change the lighting conditions. We'll change the other types of conditions to activate specific highways in the retina. And by checking the different highways, we might find one or two that's not sending signals the way it ought to. And so that's what we do. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I also have from Deborah here. I lost it. There's other questions coming in, so I keep scrolling down. If you've never developed the ability to link visual and auditory, can it be developed as an adult?
Yes. because it's just, the brain is plastic and can learn. Depth perception is a little different, although Sue Berry has shattered that thought. So it used to be thought that if you never developed depth perception at all, ever, then you couldn't get it back. But it's been proven that you now can, because Sue Berry was in her 40s and all of a sudden got
That's
depth
right.
perception back with a lot of work with Teresa Ruggiero.
Yeah, was
But
that, what was the name of the book?
that book's called Fixing My
My
Gaze.
Gaze. Yeah, thank you.
But she worked with visual, and she now has depth perception visually, but depth perception with auditory system is a whole different thing, because you still have inputs from auditory signals that have to link with visual signals.
Mhm.
So when you take visual alone and not linked with auditory, which is the fourth point we made, the fourth bullet point, it's very hard to get a full picture of what's going on around you. It's like going in class and you can watch the teacher or listen to the teacher, but can't do both. Or you have two separate TV screens, and one has just the sound and one has just the picture, and you have to kind of blend them together, figure out what's happening. Or you have a Skype call where the person speaks and then you hear that, you see their mouth move with nothing, and then there's a delay, and then you hear them speak. And it's annoying. If you've ever been on the telephone or like a video chat and watch the person's mouth move and then hear the sounds later, it's really uncomfortable. And a lot of people say, let me call you back. And they want it to be synchronized. And after brain injuries, a lot of times it isn't synchronized. And there's been studies showing, Vanderbilt University did studies in 2014, I believe, showing how it's not. In autistic people, there is a difference in the speed at which the sounds are coming in. And then, as I told on the last Facebook Live, there's even yet another study which goes back to this concept here, where they said there's measurements on the edges of the eyes, and people who have ADHD have high activity on the edge of their eyes, and people who have autism have low activity on the edge of their eyes. So it's exactly what I'm saying here. The ADHD, this part, the whole edge of the retina is active all the time when it shouldn't be. It's not muted. And in autistic people, they need to have the periphery awakened. So we're using glasses to put in front of somebody's face to activate the edges of the eyes or to mute the edges of the eyes, so that we put the person back more in the middle of this continuum rather than at either edge.
And I know we're about a half hour in, so I just want to take a second here. If anyone need to head out, I just wanted to let everyone know this is being recorded. There will be a recording available, and we're going to email it out to everyone. It should also be available on the Facebook page later for anyone who wants to check back and review this. Also, if you're interested in becoming a new patient with us, or if we are not able to reach your questions today, you can connect with a new patient advocate. They're there to educate and just inform you about what we do and see if this is a good fit. So we'll be putting that link in the comments. So please connect with us, and you'll be talking to either Jordan or CJ to just learn more about what we do and see if this is the right fit. So now we're just going to keep plowing through questions, get through as many as we can. This one's from Indigo. It says, what if you have a brain injury that requires prism glasses because of a fourth nerve palsy? Does treatment with prism glasses also take care of misjudging space and skipping words when reading?
A great question. First of all, there's different kinds of prisms, and I say this many times. Prisms are like shoes. So you're asking me a question, is it okay to use shoes, and will shoes take this problem away? Well, spiked heel shoes that are 4-inch high won't do it, but gym shoes or army boots might. So you have completely different types of prisms. If you wear sandals in winter, they're not going to help anything to prevent frostbite. If you wear UGG boots, they might prevent frostbite. So you're asking that. So the question's worded in a very funny way. There's no answer to the direct question. So, but if you have a fourth nerve palsy, typically one eye is floating upwards, and so one eye is higher than the other. And some people use a particular type of prism that angles the light upwards on the eye that's floating up and straight on the other eye. so that one eye is up this way and one is straight. That, if you're talking about that type of prism, then what it's doing is activating peripheral eyesight. And in some people, that's enough of a trigger to get their peripheral eyesights to work together and take away the misjudgment of space. But in other people with the same fourth nerve palsy, it's not enough, because some people are introverts and they're in their heads all the time. So changing the way the output, is the outside isn't enough for them to judge the space better. So it's a great question from a layperson's viewpoint, because typically they're told the prisms are going to make your two eyes work together, and therefore your depth perception will be better, and therefore you won't misjudge space as much. But that's leaving out the concept of the attitude of the person. So if you change the outside environment with the prisms, but the person isn't aware of the outside environment changing because they're just not aware of their surroundings, then they're not going to work. But if the person is hyper aware of their surroundings, then the prisms may very well be enough. Prisms can become, there's a whole different type of prism which works with your hip position. And there's another type of prisms that work with your neck and shoulder positions. So it depends what you do with prisms. It's not like a magic thing. And often we get patients who come in wearing prism glasses, and we find that prisms which shift muscles around are not good for them because they don't like their muscles being shifted around. And we change them to lenses or filters, which work more on a visceral system rather than a skeletal muscle system, and they're happier. And then you have other people who come in wearing filters, and you change them and you say, nope, you do need prisms. So it's everybody's so unique. You can't really label and say for all fourth nerve palsies require prisms, because they don't. And some do, some don't. And it depends on their neck positions and what their habit was all their life. What parts of the retina. I mean, I directed a low vision clinic for a long time, and we had a patient walk in, and he had almost looked like there was nothing wrong with him, because he was zipped in, zipped around, sat in a chair, could reach for things. And then we asked him to read the chart, and he couldn't. And he was very legally blind, and he barely could see anything. And we said, my goodness, when you walked around, it didn't even seem like anything was wrong. And he said it was because when he was a young kid, he used to play Tarzan with his friends, and they used to walk on fences and jump over trees and just do a lot of stuff requiring peripheral eyesight. And he feels that growing up, he played baseball, he was always using peripheral eyesight. And then when he got older and lost his central eyesight from a disease, it didn't matter because he was so used to using his peripheral eyesight. Then you can have a different person with the exact same problem, the exact same damage on their eye, and yet they walk around where they're feeling everything and they can barely move, and they're scared and they're anxious and they can't function because they never used their peripheral eyesight growing up. They were in pen light mode all the time. Then they lost the central eyesight and they were stuck because they didn't know how to use peripheral. So your question on will Prisms glasses make your balance and misjudgments better? It's a double-edged sword. It depends on who you were as a patient before. The who am I is really more important than the what the glasses are doing. All the glasses do is bend light, and it's what you do to the glasses that makes the difference. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and this kind of goes along with it. This is from a Key or Kai, I'm not sure. With the knowledge of neuroplasticity, what exercises could be beneficial in rebuilding?
Well, that's the same type of question.
Yeah.
I mean, if you like jigsaw puzzles, then jigsaw puzzles are a phenomenal way to work. If you hate jigsaw puzzles and never have liked them in your whole life, then that's a terrible way to give you things to do. If you love to play ball during your growing up years, then ball activities are fantastic. If you were always a klutz, then ball activities are a bad idea. So what we do is we individualize the treatments. If somebody likes to cook, there's a lot of cooking activities we can give. If they don't like to cook, we don't touch that. We do something else. There's math games. There's so many different ways to rebuild. But first, you have to figure out what it is you want to rebuild. I'm a numbers geek. So for me, I want to rebuild the numbers part of my brain. Then I would want to do all kinds of math problems because that's what I enjoy. You have other people who absolutely hate math, but they love reading. You know, they don't even want to read audiobooks. They want to read it themselves and turn the pages. You know, that's different. So there's no answer to that question because each person is given different activities for their own brain. And we have to base it on what they want to do. You know, we had one guy, all he wanted to do was fish. And he couldn't fish because the movement of the water made him dizzy and nauseous. And he really just wanted to go fishing. He didn't care about reading. He didn't care about seeing people. He didn't care about television. He wanted to fish. So for him, he had to have activities designed to make his peripheral eyesight be able to tolerate water moving from beneath him. You know, somebody else wants to do something above them. You know, we have to work on that. For instance, basketball and soccer are both sports, but soccer is all beneath you and basketball is mostly above you. So it's a different chunk of space. And if you want to play basketball, we got to work on upper space. You want to play soccer, we got to work on lower space. So we look at what motivates you, what are you interested in, what are your goals, and then we design an individual program, but there's not blanket activities that go with, you know, well, you want to rebuild your brain, it got broken.
Right. Yeah. All right. So from Skylar, my question is how misjudging space might affect the ability to carry through projects. I struggle a lot with the middle part of writing, getting from the beginning to end, trying to figure out how to get through the intermediary parts.
That's this one. That's this decision here. So when you're from this one, when you're trying to write, that's internally making up in your mind, what's the big picture? What's the main idea? Who's your audience? What are your main points that you want to get through? And then once you decide the big picture, then throwing something on a paper saying, you know, here's my main points. And then each of the main points fleshing out and pretending you're narrating to somebody. I mean, when I had a chapter come out many years ago, and the title originally was "The Eye is Connected to Lots of Stuff." And the first sentence was, "The eye is connected to lots of stuff." Now, that's not how the scientific journal came out at the end, but that's how it started to framework it. And then you start with the eye is connected to lots of stuff. And in dim lighting, some of that stuff is activated. And in bright lighting, different stuff is activated. And so it started that way, almost at a first grade level. But once you understand what you're actually trying to get out, what are the main points, then to finish it, it's for some people, like if you read Upside Down Brilliance, you need the whole. You need to see, this is what I'm going to be talking about, how the eye is connected to so many things, how lighting affects it, how head posture affects it, how balance affects it, how emotions affect it. And then the conclusion of, wow, aren't the eyes fascinating? Because you could put a pair of glasses on and change people's lives. So if that were my story and I had to write it, that's how it would start. That's the big picture. And then I would go into each paragraph and say, okay, I can't really say, you know, how is the eye connected to a lot of stuff? I would have to say, you know, retinal neuromodulation is a new emerging field, something like that. So you change the wording, but you've got to get the concepts on a piece of paper in front of you or on a bulletin board so that you can see them in your head. Visualizing in your mind helps you do that. So when we have patients who would come and say, hey, I want to help being able to write, then we would do a lot of visualization games and have you listen to things and try to pick out main points. So again, each person is individualized. So I hope that helps.
From Darlene, she has a TBI. When you have the vertigo episodes and you have to do the Epley maneuver, and you are staring at the corner with your neck at a 45-degree angle and the room is spinning. After you get the crystal to, it keeps scrolling away. Sorry. After you get the crystal to get back to you, to its place,
Mhm.
why the question kind of trailed off.
Why what?
I guess why would you have the vertigo episodes? Would be the
Because
question.
because you have sensory signals that are all mismatched. When your head's at a funny position and the crystals are moving around, your right and left sides are different. You have three labyrinths in each ear. And then what your eyes are looking at, something somewhere is mismatched. And so your brain is trying to figure out what's going on. Is that what it's asking?
Trying to see.
I mean, the Epley
It
maneuver
just
is,
trailed off the question there. It's
yeah,
I'm sorry.
okay. Well,
Suppose I
can you
should
get
have.
a complete, can you get a complete question?
Yeah, we'll come back around if Darlene's still here. Um, she can finish off the question for us. From George, the kids on the autistic spectrum have not known anything different. So if it helps them, they would use it, right?
Um,
It helps
when you
them.
say use it, you would, for an autistic child who's not used certain skills, you would have to set them up in an environment where using those skills made things faster or easier.
Mhm.
And then they would eventually, after rehearsal, use the easier way. All kids end up using whatever's easiest for them. But yeah, I know what they're saying because I worked with legally blind children a long time ago, and it was their parents who wanted them to see. The children who never ever saw before, they didn't care if they saw or not. You know, it was the parents.
Yeah.
So, but then once you got them to see, then you had to go through rehearsals of why seeing would make things quicker, because you could get them to do things faster. They were able to judge space around them a little bit more. So it's
Yeah. Okay. From Hannah, after my concussion, I tried to explain to the ER doctors that my feet felt different on the floor, or the floor felt different on my feet.
mhm,
It was as if they weren't my feet on the floor. Would Dr.
mhm.
Z comment on why I would experience this?
Yeah, because one
Exactly.
of the
Talked
things,
about this
yeah,
earlier.
uh, I'm going to take a divergence for that first. There's an example I use with feeling a door. And if you put your hand up and down, this is John Streff's example, the inventor of the Streff syndrome, the discoverer. If you make your hand move up and down on the edge of a door, it feels flat. If you're watching your hand, because your eyes and your hand will give you the same information. If you put something on your eyes to make the door appear to be curved, now your eyes are seeing a curve. Your hand is feeling a flat surface. But if you watch your hand and you follow the curve with your hand, your brain thinks that you're feeling a curve. You would swear it's a curved surface. So your eyes are going to always override your hand. Your eyes will also override your feet. So on the person who gets off of the table and then their feet don't feel the same way, it's the same illusion as the person who watches their hand and swears the door is curved. Somebody, when you're on a table and somebody's doing stuff to your neck and your head position, they're altering a visual vestibular linkage. And then when you stand up, your feet didn't get that. And so the eye and inner ear connection is different, and then that's going to override your feet sensation. It's a very weird sensation, but it goes away.
From Janine, I have a TBI and have a terrible time comprehending books slash TV shows slash movies. Do you help with this? And then she also said also dizziness and sensory coordination slash balance. Well, we kind
Oh,
of touched on that.
yeah, actually, one of my friend's sons got glasses from here, and she called up the next day. She said, "Oh my God, usually when we watch a TV movie, he's constantly asking me, who's that? What happened? I missed this." And she said he went with these new glasses and he didn't say a word through the whole movie. He just was engrossed in the movie. And she said for him, that was not normal. And it was great. So yeah, absolutely. If you're watching a movie and it moves fast, so you have action-packed movies that move fast, and then you have movies that have characters that look similar. So it depends on how your peripheral eyesight is linked with your auditory input. or how fast people are talking.
Yeah, but we don't help from a cognitive perspective, correct?
Well, we don't do anything from a cognitive perspective. We work with Donna Lee Marcus for that. We work from a perceptual level. And so if we go back to this slide here, I'll show you here, this one. Oops. So the movie, you'd have your eyes sending signals in and the other sensory inputs. You'd have your ears sending signals in. So what the person is saying is the ear signals and the eye signals are not being matched. So the mental filtering is confusing. So their conscious attention can go on one or the other, but they miss things. And then they're also saying they get dizzy sometimes. So that's saying the inner ear signals and the neck signals go in and are mismatched. And what she's asking, or he's asking, is if we put glasses on and synchronize all the inputs, so all the sensory inputs are good, then by the time your conscious attention comes out, you would be able to listen to the movie better and hopefully not be as dizzy.
Mhm. Okay. All right. So Janine, I believe this is the same Janine, also said, I've been told that I often speak louder than I should. I don't even realize this, guessing my ears can't perceive it or hear my voice correctly and catch the increased volume. Is this common for a TBI?
It is the voice modulation. Absolutely. We just had a patient the other day like that. And because we test that, I'll stand farther away and then go closer and match, see what they're doing. And some of the people will stay the same volume, whether I'm real close or really far. So you can tell right away that there's a brain processing problem. The fact that they know it about themselves is awesome, because once you know something and you want to work on it, that's the attitude we're looking for.
Absolutely. All right, this is
We
from
do.
Jan. Oh, sorry. From Jan, can you help with an Alzheimer's patient with terrible depth perception now?
That's a good question. Most Alzheimer's patients do have depth perception problems. In fact, it's interesting because with an Alzheimer's patient, we can put a target up like here and just ask them to touch it with their eyes wide open, and they understand and they can't. Their whole peripheral processing is really, really different than normal. So if we had a Alzheimer's patient with poor depth perception, we could figure out a pair of glasses that would allow them to match their world with, but because Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, it might be good at this moment, but it depends on how the disease is progressing. To help Alzheimer's patients, you have to have movement, because my mentor, Albert Sutton, he used to work with that. He used to play tennis and with an Alzheimer's patient. And when he did that, they stayed better and their progression didn't go at such a steep curve. So movement is really good. And also changing their environment, that flexibility is good. We had another Alzheimer's patient and we said, change their seat at dinner, change where they sit in the room to watch the television, change their position when they sleep at night, put them in a different spot in the car, because all of that's different. As their environment keeps changing, they have to adapt. That adaptability builds intelligence and it builds back brain cells through neuroplasticity. So the answer to the question is yes, we could help an Alzheimer's patient get some depth perception, but there's no magic glasses that say, here, put these on, now you have depth perception. You have to rehearse the depth perception. You have to navigate through space. You have to use the new depth perception until it becomes part of you and you get new neural pathways.
From Anthony, would it help with a 10-year anoxic brain injury?
Yes, it could. I work with HIE, which is the hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. And even if you have something that's 10 years old, you can find new brain pathways. And that one depends on the age of the patient. It also depends on whether they're verbal or nonverbal and which parts of the brain had the hypoxia. But you can often build different brain pathways and ignore the ones that are damaged. You don't fix the damaged ones, you just build new ones. Like, the highway broke, So you got to build a dirt road, and then you have to use the dirt road and make it turn into a new highway later.
Mhm. And this is a good question, I think, that a lot of people have. Is from Deborah, who I think asked a question earlier. But where does my neurologist fit into this?
A neurologist is a medical doctor that specializes in neurological diseases. So your neurologist would be there to make sure that you don't have a nerve disease like Alzheimer's or ALS or Parkinson's or seizures. A lot of neurologists work with seizures and epilepsy, and a lot of times post-concussion or TBI patients have epilepsy or forms of it, TBI induced. So your neurologist would fit in to make sure that if you have epilepsy, your seizures are under control. If you have Parkinson's, your body's under control. Schizophrenia, I mean, a lot of stuff. But the neurologist would fit in as part of the team if you need one.
Mhm.
If you don't have a disease of any sort, then they've ruled out anything. You know, a neurologist would also look for problems that could indicate a brain tumor, you know, or brain bleeds. I mean, once you've checked out of that and you're deemed healthy, then we would come in. So the neurologist would be first to rule out any structural damage.
Okay, and then from Sylvia, please explain how you would help someone with hyperacusis and tinnitus.
That's a harder one. Some of the hyperacusis and tinnitus can be helped through loosening the jaw muscle. So that's a completely different practitioner. Sometimes hyperacusis can be caused by an imbalance between the right and left ears. And if we put glasses on to alter visual space, that alters auditory space because of the posture. So the glasses can alter posture. Like for instance, if I put glasses on that bent the light from one angle on the side, that's going to pull the eyes to that side and that's going to rotate the neck. When you rotate the neck, then the auditory space is different. And if you change the auditory space, sometimes the hyperacusis goes away. Other times it lessens. So that's a loaded question because again, it depends on so many factors and they all deal with muscle tension. So I can't take that as a question all by itself. I would have to know the patient's posture, whether they always, let's say they have a spasm on their left shoulder or their right lower back is always tense. And if so, that can be the trigger for the hyperacusis. And then you would need to have a body practitioner and work. If I go back to my slides, that would be this one here. That would be the muscular systems person. So the tinnitus would be the muscular systems, sometimes the chemical systems, because you can get ringing in the ears based on too much activity in the brain sometimes. But most of the time, I find it to be a neck position. So it would be, you would want a muscular type of practitioner.
Mhm. Okay. Coming down to it, I'm just going to take a few more or a couple more questions here. Again, if we don't get to your questions, please feel free to connect with one of our new patient advocates who can answer a lot of these questions and just help guide you to see if we are a good fit and see if you know this is the right start for you.
Let me just turn the lights on in here. I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
I didn't notice that. And again, there will be a recording of this available afterwards. So if you need to chat, feel free to do so. Okay. Lost my question again. From Janet, if you need a cataracts removed from both eyes, would you do that before seeking treatment from us?
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Because if you came to us and we did something and then you went and had a cataract removed, then you're completely different. Everything's different. For cataracts, there's different kinds of implants. So what we've been recommending from Mind Eye is not to have toric implants with astigmatism, especially if you've had a brain injury. That makes it even worse. So, but if you got the implants, the standard implants with no astigmatism, no bifocal, then came to us, then we could work with.
This is from Grain, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. My mom is 80 and she recently fell and hit her head hard. She was in the hospital for 12 days off and on with a high heart rate. After that, she was exhausted all the time. Her energy is now better, but she feels unsteady on her feet, like the ground is either too far or too close. She also can't understand what people are saying a lot of the time, volume and also comprehension, and feels her glasses aren't working. What is happening?
The fall kind of unplugged things that were in her brain. She's like the classic patient we do see. That's of everything you've asked me, David, that's the one that's the most like what we see all the time.
Yeah.
So that would be the one that would be like a 911. Her glasses, as I said earlier, just bend light. So when she fell and then hit her head, something got disrupted. So the center of her eyes might be the same, but the periphery isn't. Because if she was in the hospital for 12 days, then there was a fight or flight response. Your brain goes into trauma mode, and then your peripheral eyesight, turns on red alert because they're looking for danger. So something's different. So it would be helpful for her to see.
And I think this is a question we receive in our office a lot, though not like, not really a question I don't think we ever receive on here, but it says, why is it that when you have an MRI on the brain or MRI of the brain, sometimes brain injuries are not evident in the X-ray, even though they are clearly there?
Because X-rays don't see the same thing as MRIs, and that doesn't see the same things as CAT scans. So I mean, the MRI is looking for structural damage of soft tissue, and the X-rays are looking for structural damage of hard bones and things. So they're just different tests.
There's one other one. It's gonna be one last one. I apologize. From Henry, do self-organizing fields play a role in low latency inhibition?
I don't know what self-organizing fields are. Does it say what?
I don't see anything. Sorry.
So I can't tell
then
you.
then I'll ask this question here. From Eileen, can you help someone who has problems with spatial perception who also has macular degeneration?
Yeah, that I can do. I've worked with macular degeneration even in the 80s. And I worked with Blind Services Association here in Chicago since 89, I think, or 90. I worked in Florida with the macular degeneration clinics. I did my residency, an externship with macular degeneration patients. And then for Blind Services, we put together an 8-week course called the Macular Connection. And we taught step by step for 8 weeks, different skills that had to be rebuilt to teach people a brand new way to see. So absolutely we could do, you don't fix the macula, but what people don't realize is that if the retina were the size of a postage stamp, that the macula would be like the size of a dot. If you took a pen and you made a dot, like a period on the postage stamp, the rest of the retina, the whole rest of the postage stamp is healthy. It's just the little dot that's not working. So once you realize that the macula is a teeny tiny little part and there's all this leftover that's untouched because it has a different blood supply, so macular degeneration doesn't affect it at all. You just have to learn to use it. And people with macular degeneration don't. They've spent 70 or 80 years using their maculas. Now they're degenerated, they can't do it. So it would be like if you had fingers and you've spent all your time holding a pen with your first 2 fingers, and now somebody cut off your first finger. Now you can't write anymore. Well, you can learn how to use your thumb with a different finger. It's just different. And you have to break an old habit and develop a new habit. But yeah, that's definitely workable. But again, it depends on attitude.
And sorry, I'm going to circle back on one just because I saw Deborah typed in here that she's a cognitive neurologist. So she was the one who asked, where does my neurologist fit into all of this? So she said she is a cognitive neurologist.
Ah, well, that's a whole different thing than a regular neurologist. Yeah, that's a cognitive neurologist would be used when you're building back your brain as part of a team. So it would be an asset to have. But the cognition is a higher level thought process. There's low levels. So first you got to get the sensory integration because that's the lower reflex level. Then you have a subconscious level of perception, and that's what we work with. And then when you're done with the perception and the sensory integration, then you get into the cognition, and that's where the cognitive neurologist would come in.
And Deborah, if you have more questions, feel free to talk to one of our new patient advocates who can kind of guide you through what it is we do a little more. But that's going to be it. Thank you so much, Dr. Z, for spending this time tonight. And thank you to everyone here who attended. Again, there will be a recording of this available. If we didn't answer your question tonight, or if you'd like to speak to one of our new patient advocates, there will be a link in the comments to connect with them and ask your questions. Dr. Z, anything you want to add?
No, if the 80-year-old who fell and is our classic patient, are they from the Chicago area?
I don't know. Great question.
Because that would be that's exactly what we see.
I don't know. It's tough for me to.
Thank you, David, for hosting this, and thanks to Amara.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, great. If you see this, please connect with us if you're in the Chicago area. All right. Thank you, everybody. We're gonna head out. Have a good night.
Bye.